Today we are at the Nairobi War Cemetery. We were looking for Patrick ABUNGU, who is working for the Commonwealth War Graves nowadays, but Patrick has been a very close friend and colleague of mine at Mombasa in Fort Jesus, where we were sharing the same office at Fort Jesus Museum in the Department of Archaeology. I'm very happy to see you again. I have missed you a lot. And then you were part of the Slafnet project, but not only, because when I arrived in Mombasa, you were not in. You were in South Africa doing your master. But then when you came back from South Africa, we started to work together, and especially with the Frerton people. So the idea of our exchange today, it is maybe to tell the story of our meeting, of encounter, and then how we reached all together until the Slafnet project. And maybe you can tell us what the Slafnet project brought to you, that I hope that it brought something to you. Okay. Merci beaucoup, Patrick.
Thank you, Marie-Pierre. The pleasure is mine. I'm happy to see you as well. It's been a long time. Yeah. My name is Patrick ABUNGU. I worked for the National Museums of Kenya for quite a number of years, more than 20 years. By the time I was leaving, I was managing Shimoni Heritage Landscape at the south coast, south of Mombasa. I was the curator. And I met Marie-Pierre, as she has correctly said, when she came to the National Museums of Kenya in Fort Jesus. I was away in South Africa doing my master's degree. But when I came back, then we started working together. And we worked in different places. We worked in Freyatown, which is basically the place where the freed slaves were settled. We worked in the Kayas, and that means we worked also in Rabai, where another remnants of freed slaves were settled. At the moment, I work for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission as the heritage manager of the Non-Commemorations Project. And our work with Marie-Pierre, actually, Slafnet, that is the slavery in Africa, the study of slaveries in Africa, which is a collaboration between the North and the South, was born in a very interesting way. There was a meeting in Paris, France, and my colleague Samuel Nyanchoga, the professor, and I traveled, and Marie-Pierre, and Professor and Miriam Courtiers. And we met in I believe what was a classroom with Professor Ibrahim Atube. And there was this theorizing of we need to do a project in Africa talking about slavery in Africa instead of doing it in the Western world, because it happened from Africa. And that's how it was born. And I remember again having a meeting in Nice with several of our colleagues. And it was also born again in a classroom, where Marie-Pierre now started to spearhead the project, and it's never looked back since then.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I remember very well when we met in October 2015. It was just after the conference in Nairobi, SLAFCO 1, where Samuel hosted it, and we were all together. And then the idea was, no, we did this big conference. We don't have to stop. We need to move forward. Then we had this meeting, and then we thought, okay, Miriam told us, so maybe we could go to the European Commission. So I was very scared. But then we applied, and we were successful. And what did you do yourself within Slafnet?
I think after Slafnet, after the application of the European Commission and the funding, then I think it opened so many doors, especially the exchange programs, where somebody from Kenya, and I was talking about earlier the challenges of getting information maybe in archives. And the funny thing is that being a beneficiary, being part of Slafnet, then I could travel to Europe to access records, Kenyan records in Europe. So I think that was very beneficial, and the exchange of ideas, walking, going, meeting different people, having different meetings, sharing ideas. It basically opened up the scope of our talk, the scope of our dialogue, and in my view cemented sort of the East African slave trade, the West Indian Ocean island, that many people didn't believe even took place, because people have talked about the transatlantic so much, it's been studied so much, but the East African was silent. And I think through Slafnet, now if you Google slavery, then something comes up about East Africa. To me, that is a bonus, because it's something that was never talked about. It was a taboo subject. And just talking about it, researching it, talking with communities, having them to even think about saying that, yes, it was there. Because initially, both sides, the people who benefited and the people who were slaved, did not talk about it, because nobody wanted to be looked at as a descendant of a slave. But they opened up and they started talking about it. And I think that is very healthy. And in places like Freetown, you go to Shimoni, you go to Gazi, people can now sit and talk about this. I mean, after Slafnet came. And for me, that is a positive development.
Slafnet was important for us, but the work that you have done in Shimoni, it has started a long time ago, before Slafnet. So maybe you could tell us were you able to open this Shimoni slavery museum? Because I think we also benefited from the work which was done at the museum.
Shimoni was a very interesting case study, because this is it's a cave where slaves were kept before transit to Zanzibar and the islands where the slave market was. And talking about slavery was a taboo. But Shimoni started creating relevance first. Because when Shimoni was opened, and it was initiative by the community, and one of the community members was a very old man who had moved from Australia into Shimoni and had lived there for a very long time. And he was running the Pemba Channel fishing expedition. And he had the money, but there are people living in Shimoni, basically remnants of the European, the former colonialists. And they have so much money, but within Shimoni itself, there was a lot of poverty. And so the cave was an asset, a heritage landscape that had this very sad history, having served as a slave pen. But at the same time, it was also a hiding place for the people during the raids. It was also raids by cattle rustlers and all that. I don't want to call it cattle rustlers, it was sort of a spot where the Galas and the Maasais believe that every cow is there, so they'll come to take their cows, and the community will hide. So it's a multi-layered heritage landscape. But with the help of the community, and this had never been done, the idea was, this is a heritage landscape, the government will declare it a gazetted monument, and then if you are the owner, then you step on that ground, then you are a trespasser. But here it was a situation where we were introducing the idea of having the community managing a heritage site with the National Museums of Kenya. It was unheard of, and there was a lot of resistance. But once it was agreed, and it was a trial, the former chief curator said, okay, you go and try, but I don't see you making anything. You try. And so having series of meetings with the community, agreeing on what to do, cleaning the caves, researching and presenting it, and then visitors starting coming in, and money accruing going into community benefit programs like education, water, health, where money accruing from the cave entry was being used to supply, give all these things that the government subsidized, pay for extra teachers in local schools. And then that, because people from both sides, the enslavers and the enslaved, were benefiting. It became sort of a dialogue ground. And out of that, out of telling the story of Shimoni, out of presenting the story, the unique case of Shimoni, and how a heritage landscape tied to slave trade and slavery can be turned into something that is relevant to the current community, sort of opened up. So Shimoni became sort of an idea that even as we were doing Slafnet and studying and researching and writing papers, we were always looking at how do we turn this into tangible benefits for the community, maybe looking at what has been done in Shimoni. And I'm happy that that happened, because talk to anybody from any part of Africa, they'll tell you we have a lot of challenges and we are always looking for answers. So our heritage landscape is not just a place of leisure. It's a resource for development. And so when we are looking at a heritage landscape, we always think, how do we do it? How can we make it relevant to the communities? How can those communities benefit? How can they take their children using what is coming from this space to take their children to school? How will they get extra medicine so that when they go to the local dispensary, they can be treated? If there was an emergency, can they have a surgical kitty that will take this person to a bigger hospital? That was realized in Shimoni. And so it's not just about slave trade and slavery and the pain of it. It's about how do we turn this into the current contemporary society's benefit. And that to me, and even today I was looking at my emails and it comes, are you the Patrick Abungu that Maripia has cited on this? Are you the Patrick Abungu that Julie has cited on this? It's what we've done. It's what people are looking at, what has been done, and trying to replicate it elsewhere through what we've shared, because Slafnet was exchange of ideas, exchange of mobilities, and then exchange of these ideas within forums. Exactly. And publishing, so that we can spread the slave trade and the history of slave trade and slavery, and how it's being converted into relevancy at this time.
Yeah, because there is the cave, there is what you have done with the community, there is the opening of the Shimoni Slavery Museum in 2014, if I'm not wrong. And then we also did within Slafnet this workshop in Mombasa. And one of the objectives of the workshop with our Ethiopian colleagues and also Samuel who came was to think about how we are teaching this history of slave trade and slavery in East Africa. And this was a big challenge. So we had, if I remember, the first day was among academics. But then the following day, we had the civil society with us. So, and you were the one who organized that. We were together, but you hosted us in Mombasa.
It's interesting because we are always together, Maripia. I mean, in the opening of the Slavery Museum, Shimoni Slavery Museum in 2014, you were the one with me. I mean, not so many of my colleagues were there, but you were there.
Yeah. I'm always around.
You are always there. And I think that's the positive thing. And ever since we met, we've always had this idea of, we've always sort of complemented each other and worked together and walked this journey. And even as you are referring to me as I was, it's not was. I am still Slafnet.
I'm still with
Slafnet. Yes, you are still with me. And you will be with me for a very long time. Yeah. Because I know whatever we've done together, the meetings that we had, imagine when going to school, primary school, high school, there was talk, there was something in the syllabus about slave trade and slavery. And we learned about tipu-tipu and all these things. But now if you look at the syllabus, it has been removed systematically. It was systematically removed and devalued. And so you start wondering, how powerful are these people who benefited from this, that they can systematically even remove it from the teaching curriculum. And so the meeting that we had in Mombasa and brought in lecturers from the university, brought in teachers from high school, from primary school, to think about this. And they talked about the challenges because it's being taught as trade. It's just one subject falling under trade. So when they say what are different kinds of trade, they say slave trade, but they don't zero in on this important historical subject that is affecting people even now.
Yeah, of course.
Because the legacy of slavery continues. It's very enduring. It's continuous. And I think even when we were talking and with colleagues, they'll tell you down at the coast, if you are engaged to marry and one of the families realize that either the groom or the bride has some slave blood in them, then they'll cancel it. So those are some of the things, but you see what we've done is to create that dialogue, a healthy dialogue, and try to remove the emotions from it and looked at it so that people can talk about it and realize that slave trade happened just like the World War. What do we learn from it? And it's what's so important to bring in the teachers, the lecturers, to put this idea together and look at what methodologies do we apply to ensure that we don't lose this subject, we don't lose this history. And that can only be done in a classroom.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the key things that happened within Slafnet. And
there is a lot to do because it is exactly what we were discussing with the other colleagues in Dar es Salaam. So with the Ethiopian team, the Senegalese one, with Samuel, with even Nyanto from the Dar es Salaam University. So now that the network is created, we need to move forward and to insist on the necessity of teaching this history to young and the large public.
And one of the good things, and I learned this more of it because we also collaborate, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, collaborating with the Technical University of Kenya to do the one in Nairobi, to make an animation on, and we can only imagine because there's no much literature about the carriers, what is called, if you come to Nairobi, you find Kariako. You go Dar es Salaam, Kariako. Kariako was what was a corrupted word of carrier corps. And so there was this, but we were talking about getting a subject like slavery into the Kenyan curriculum. And because the National Museums of Kenya are part of this and the universities, it's easier for them to talk about it and influence and bring in the materials that can be adapted into this learning. So those are some ways. I never forgot about that. And every time I dialogue with stakeholders, especially the universities, then we ask them, apart from this, my interest is slave trade and slavery. How do we get that back into the Kenyan curriculum? And so there are a lot of suggestions, and those are things that needs to be followed up at that level. If it's Professor Samuel Nyanshoga, then you are part of this process. How do we do this? How do we start how do we ensure that the book or the books that have been published on this are part of that learning material within our schools and within our colleges?
Yeah, no, exactly. It is really what we need to do, because this is what we are seeing. All of the colleagues with whom we have shared, they are saying the same in all the countries that we have been working with. And just maybe to finish, so now you are working with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. We had a very nice visit, thanks to you and Jeffrey. Could you please explain to us what you are doing now? And because what you are doing is very important also in terms of memory, of terms in equity, and in terms of recognition.
Yes, I'm currently the Heritage Manager, Commonwealth War Graves Commission, what is called the Non-Commemorations Project. The non-commemoration project falls within the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which was started in 1917 as Imperial War Graves Commission. And 1917 was towards the end of First World War. And the policy, which was the Royal Charter, it was started under the Royal Charter, was to take care of the World War casualties in perpetuity so that their memories live forever. And the idea or the policy stated that where the bodies were found and the graves were known, and this started with the Graves Registration Unit, which I think was very active in Belgium, France, and all the Western Front, was where the bodies were recovered, then they will have a permanent burial with a gravestone stating the details of the dead individual, the dead soldier. And it was supposed to be done equally. And soldiers were buried where they fell. So if you are French and you died in the UK, then you are buried there with your colleagues. And where the bodies were never found, especially those who were torpedoed in their waters, then the same details will be on a memorial. And there was no order of rank. It was irrespective of rank, of color, of religion. But over 100 years down the line, it seems that as that happened in the Western Front, it didn't happen much in other places, especially in Africa and the Middle East. The Middle East, Africa, I think India as well. And this came about. It could have been known, it was known, but it came about, it was brought to the forefront in 2019 when a British parliamentarian aired in Channel 4 in the UK a documentary called The Unremembered. And he brought all this evidence of where, especially in East Africa, you came to Kenya, Tanzania, went to all these places. This is where the Africans were buried. No headstones, no names, no memorials. And basically their graves were left to revert to nature. That is the language in the literature. And so the Commonwealth War Graves Commission constituted a committee that looked into its affairs right back in from the First World War to date. And it looked at itself and realized that, yes, there were omissions, there was inequality, there was truth in that. And so the committee formed a 10-point guideline on what needs to be done to correct those anomalies. And one of them was to form a team that will research and work with communities in various places and recommend various forms of commemorations for those who are uncommemorated. That's where the name uncommemorated comes from. And so the non-commemoration team was formed, and the Nairobi office was the first field office. So I'm the heritage manager, then I have two heritage supervisors, and we have a historian, and we have people. So it's a joint thing. We have historians at the headquarters working with the British National Archives. Tanzania, we were in Malawi, been to Tanzania, looking at the archival records. And whatever we get and we identify where these places are, like the coast we have Mkongani in Kwale, Friends of For Jesus used to go there and would tell me, and I didn't know this was, I knew they were World War soldiers, but it came, that was my first assignment. And so we are working with those communities around those heritage sites to find the best ways of commemorating the dead soldiers, the carriers, the porters, and at the same time, such commemorations should be of benefit to those communities, just the way Slafnet and Shimoni slave caves, that example. So we've adapted that model, and we're already looking at, in Kwale, maybe moving students of various schools of that location to take travels to Mamangina, Drive, Mombasa, for Jesus, because most of them have never even gone to Mombasa. And so we are using this heritage to bring that exposure and let them see different parts of the world, see different people, and thinking wide from the locals, and think wide and aim wide even as they go to school. And so we are also doing oral histories. The Second World soldiers, veterans, are still there. They are about, average age is around 100 and 104 going to 105. And where we find them, we still interview them and capture their story and share. Where they are not there, then we talk to their descendants. So that this story was never told, because when they came back, like the Kenyan part, they landed in Mombasa. They were taken to their district headquarters, and most of them had to walk for days to go back to their homes. And they are telling, when they arrived, people wailed. When they were taken, people were mourning, crying that they were dead. When they came back, it was like the dead has awoken. And they say how the commotion, people crying of happiness. And those who didn't come and went with them, people are crying of sadness. So this unfinished story, because many of the communities know that their people went, but they have no idea where they went, where they are. Some of them, a lady that we talked with in Kitui by chance, has been waiting for the husband for the last 79 years. The husband is buried in Calcutta in India. We were able to look at our records, print out the documents, go and show and tell her, this is where your husband is buried. And she said, you have brought my husband home. I won't be looking at the gate again. I accept that he died and is being looked at. So that closure, we are telling stories that had not been told. It was also silent, just like the slave trade and slavery. But now we are bringing it to the public domain and speaking with them and telling them, what do you want us to do together? Kariakoo Cemetery, we are having the biggest project there since the end of Second World War. It will be a focal point to tell the stories of those people whose stories have never been told, as a linking point, just the way people come to Fort Jesus. And then they know, okay, there's Malindi, there's Gede, there's Shimoni. So Kariakoo would play that part. The Wavell Park in Mombasa, we are developing that to tell the story of heritage landscape associated with World War I along the coast, so that we have the trails. So we're already working with the people in the museums, the people of the coast, across the countries. And after this, then we'll be going out to other places. So basically, that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Okay, not very far from what we were doing.
Not far. No, not very far.
But
very
the project is wonderful, and it is very noble as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Patrick. I think we had a very nice discussion.
Thank you, Marie-Pierre, as usual.
Yeah.
You are always a blessing.
Yeah, to me as well.
Yeah.